I'm Brroks Melchior, and I'm from Los Angeles, California. Glad you're joining us today, and we're going to be talking a lot of NFL over the next 2 hours with some great guests, and we're going to touch on all the big stories coming up in the NFL, with the NFL kicking off tomorrow night. Yes, it's going to be the Packers and the Bears. Kind of a meh. I don't know. It's a decent matchup. Mitchell Trubisky, opening night in the NFL. Not that excited, but you got Aaron Rodgers. So it'll be fun. That's what happens with those primetime games. They give us kind of a 50-50 game. You never know what's going to happen. But then, of course, we get to the weekend and we get really started into the National Football League. And we're going to, on Sports by Brooks on Fancred, over the next few days, starting today, we're going to be drilling down on the NFL, and we're going to be doing it with you on the fan line. If you look at the top right corner of your screen, you'll see a button there. You can click on it, and you'll be all set. You'll go into our producer, Cam Smith, and he'll get you squared away, and we'll try to get you up on the show. But we're going to be having some guests coming up later on in the show, including Matt Williamson, a former NFL scout, former college scout, ESPN analyst for 10 years, and now a Locked On podcaster. He does the Locked On NFL podcast, and he's based in Pittsburgh. So we're going to be talking to him about a very recent story that just broke. The Raiders are fining Antonio Brown $53,950. This just came across for missing 2 practices. Now, that's the headline. But that's not the story. The story is Antonio Brown posted on his Instagram the letter that the Raiders sent to him detailing those fines for missing 2 practices, a letter from general manager Mike Mayock. So all hell is breaking loose. Just when you think you can't count on Antonio Brown anymore, well, he comes through. And he comes through the night before the NFL kicks off. Thank goodness. And unfortunately, we didn't see a lot of that in Hard Knocks. Let me know, by the way, Cam, if you want to bring anybody in. Happy to talk to him. Happy to talk to you. And I'm dead serious. You want to get on? I mean, I'm not afraid of you guys out there. You're more than welcome to come in. And we'll talk about the NFL. We'll talk a little baseball coming up. Now, we're not going to be talking that much baseball for that much longer, maybe until we get to the playoffs. But we're going to get a primer on one of the best teams in Major League Baseball, National League East leader Atlanta Braves. The voice of the Atlanta Braves, Jim Powell, will join us, and he'll break down the Braves for us and what they look like, how they're setting up for the playoffs. And maybe we'll get into some Mets talk, some Schadenfreude Mets talk with Jim Powell, the voice of the Atlanta Braves. That's coming up at around the top of the hour. Coming up in about 5 minutes, we're going to talk to Matt Williamson. And then later on, a very, very special guest in the context of what we were going to be leading on this podcast with coming in. We got blindsided by Antonio Brown. Had to mention that. And by the way, Matt Williamson, based in Pittsburgh, the guy we're going to talk to, former NFL scout, in about 5 minutes. And we're going to get the lowdown from him on what kind of a guy Antonio Brown is and his analysis of what's going on right now. So a little serendipity there. But coming up later on in the show, in the next hour, we're going to talk to the guy who I like to describe as the Oracle, the NFL Oracle. And that's former Packers GM and NFL agent, broadcaster, professor, entrepreneur, podcaster, Andrew Brandt. One of the best people you could possibly follow on Twitter. He's already giving you the analysis of the big story over the last probably 18 hours, and that is the signings of Jared Goff, quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams, $110 million guaranteed, along with the very recent signing early this morning of Ezekiel Elliott. That came down about 4 o'clock Pacific time. And Elliott signs for $50 million guaranteed. Essentially, it was a $50 million deal for 4 years as an extension onto his rookie contract. Now, Andrew Brandt is the man, and he's going to be able to decipher all this stuff and really tell us what matters. He's going to be coming up in the next hour. And tomorrow, we're going to have some very, very special guests on the opening night of NFL football. Ian Rappaport, you know who he is. He doesn't need any introduction with any of us. He's going to be joining us along with Matt Perrault, who's a national radio host, does the show Pushing the Odds on SB Nation Radio every day, Monday through Friday. But he's going to join us from Vegas inside a sports book on the fan line. It's going to be very cool. We're going to start the show with it, and we're going to get deep into gambling, deep into the betting, deep into the props, the over-unders, all that stuff with Matt Perrault. And I'm not going to spoil any more guests, but we've got a lot more coming down the line for you, and they're going to be extremely timely and oft prescient. Oft prescient. Now, they're precious too, right? And so if you want to join Sports by Brooks on Fancred, on the fan line, go to the top right corner of this video screen and click on the button, and we'll bring you in. Cam, feel free to throw people at me. Obviously, I haven't set anything up yet. We're going to talk about Ezekiel Elliott. And the intention was when we opened the show, we'll get to this in a little bit, when we were going to talk about Zeke, particularly his situation, how it interfaces with Jerry Jones and Dak Prescott, specifically Amari Cooper. And later on, I'm going to drill down and give you my take on the Jared Goff signing and why, well, the Rams might not be the team we think they are. We're going to get into all of that, but we're coming right up against Matt Williamson. So I want to kind of save those takes, other than to say, one thing to look at with Ezekiel Elliott and that signing and all the rhetoric, all the things that you heard from Jerry Jones in particular. If you go back to 1993, you may or may not remember Emmitt Smith, the famous running back for the Cowboys at the time, was battling Jerry Jones over a contract situation, an impasse, if you will, and Jones wouldn't budge. In fact, Emmitt Smith sat out 2 games that year, right? Before Emmitt Smith got what he wanted after the Cowboys lost their first 2 games of the year. So after the first 2 games of the year, I apologize, Kim. I'm still trying to get the hang of this. And let me know when we have Matt on. So, hey, Judah, by the way, thanks for commenting. And obviously, we're going to be getting to your comments. This is still kind of a work in progress, working with it. And glad you're here with us, Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And I'm going to get back into that take specifically on Jerry Jones, Emmitt Smith, that triangle, and Ezekiel Elliott after we visit with Matt Williamson, who is with us on the line now here on Fancred. Matt Williamson, of course, the former NFL scout, former college scout, longtime ESPN analyst based in Pittsburgh. And now you can go over to Locked On and you can check out his podcast every single day. He's doing the NFL over there. Matt Williamson joins us. Matt, thanks a lot for stopping by.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to talk to you.
And what a time for you to stop by as a guy from Pittsburgh, and you're looking at this Antonio Brown thing. And, you know, we were just talking about this. The headline is he was fined $60,000. Well, that's not really the story to me, at least. The story is that he posted the Mike Mayock letter on his Instagram. I mean, what's your instant reaction to that?
Not surprised at all, to be honest with you. And for those that aren't familiar, I host a daily show from 4 to 6 for Steeler Nation Radio. I lived at training camp, basically. I'm down at the facility a lot, so I am kind of closer to the team. It's not like I was buddies with AB or anything, but obviously a lot of correlation with him. And I think people kind of need to know his backstory in that he grew up close to being homeless in a really, really rough neighborhood in Florida.
Desperation.
Yeah,
Situation.
and really didn't grow up trusting anyone. I mean, he had to do everything just to get by and survive. And he's a self-made guy in that way. And his work ethic is legendary. I mean, he became a great player.
Did you see that? I mean, you were living camp, so you were around and you would see the long hours.
He's always the last
extra work
on the field. And I mean, working on every little bit. And the team was worried when he'd go home, he'd work out too much, that he'd beat up his body too much. So that is something I think people need to know about him. Some people that are close to him absolutely think that he changed dramatically after his concussion with the Burfict hit. From a couple of standpoints of maybe it did damage, who knows? But I think at that point he actually he felt like he was kind of mortal for the first time. That, this career that I love and I've worked so hard for might not be here forever. And I think as a consequence, he started thinking about himself a little bit more and his brand and all those things. And then he's kind of been an odd bird, to say the least. I mean, and I can tell you the Steelers are happier that he's not here, to be honest with you, despite he's as good as ever. I mean, if you watch the tape, he's as good as ever. But they're in a better place without him.
Matt Williamson is joining us here on the Fan Line on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And when you watch this Antonio Brown thing play out with the Raiders and knowing what you know and having observed him and been around him, I mean, does it cross over really into concern now? Like it really sounds like there is that kind of a connection, that personal connection you have, Matt. So does it start to cross over in kind of a personal concern? Or maybe not.
We're not friends and he doesn't know me. I mean, we're not, but yes, I mean, considering where he was 3-4 years ago, what his teammates thought of him 3-4 years ago, like down the line, his football life for 30 for 30 is going to be unbelievably interesting and probably even more bizarre than we realize. I wonder at this point, I mean, do the Raiders, they need him. I mean, on the field, anyone could use him on the field. I wonder if they're having buyer's remorse. And a lot of people gave the Steelers a hard time. Like, you only got a third and a fifth for Antonio Brown. Well, there wasn't anybody else that wanted him.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I wanted to ask you about the Clowney trade in particular, because I don't think it's been sufficiently answered in the media. And I've looked around, maybe I've missed some of this, but what motivated Bill O'Brien, you think, to trade him for so little? I mean, what's going on? And maybe it's not just Bill O'Brien inside that organization. What was the motivation that went into making a trade like that?
I'm almost positive the motivation. If you remember, Bill O'Brien comes from the Patriots way of doing things and Belichick, and Clowney, going back to his days in college, I mean, he's immensely talented. He's like the top recruit in the country, isn't considered a hard worker. I mean, he's not a work ethic grindstone guy. And I don't think O'Brien, who now basically runs the whole organization, there's not a GM there, that's important, doesn't want to send the message to the rest of the team that, hey, we're going to give big money to a guy that isn't a grinder, or I'm not saying he's lazy, but could do more. We're going to give it to Watson and Hopkins and Watt and guys like that.
But there's a kind of a limit to that too.
Yeah, right. I mean,
there's the happy medium.
Right, absolutely. And so I don't agree with the trade. I would have had him play it out this year and then let him be on his way. You don't have to resign him, but you could at least get a year's worth of service out of the guy on a team that won the division last year. Andrew Luck's out of the division. Their move to get Tunsil shows they're in it to win it now. Clowney would help, and they have the cap space. So from a football perspective, I don't understand it. I mean, to answer your question, I think that was their logic, but why not get one more year out of them?
What's the real story of Bill O'Brien's personality? Because you don't really hear conflicting. You don't hear a lot of positive. But from what you understand from your sources, what do you hear about Bill O'Brien? What kind of guy he is?
I don't have great sources on that, to be very honest with you, but I don't think he's a gentle, easy to get along with type of dude. One thing I do think that isn't fair about O'Brien, though, is he gets that team to 8-8, 9-7 every year, and they had
Force of will kind of guy.
yeah, I mean, they had some terrible quarterbacks, and he was still getting them to the postseason or getting them to 9 wins before Watson. So I do think there's some coaches out there that get a few more wins than their talent base suggests, and I think he's one of them.
You know, I've got a question about the Melvin Gordon situation, because it seems like with the Chargers, and Lord knows this could happen with the Chargers, a lot of NFL teams, there seems to be kind of a disconnect. I don't know if it's a function of the media reporting information that might not necessarily be 100% true, but you hear about the Chargers asking for a 1 for Gordon and another pick for Gordon, yet they're lowballing Gordon. So what's going on?
My hunch is if you offered them a 2 right now, they would take it and be happy with it. I think they're very happy with Eckler and Jackson. Gordon's a good player. He's not a great player. They're a frugal organization. I mean, you look at the Cowboys with the Zeke situation and the Chargers with the Gordon situation. If you look at all 32 teams, I think one is frugal on one side and one's the opposite, and that's Dallas. And Elliott's a superior player. What I think is going to happen is I don't think Gordon's probably going to play for the Chargers this year. If I were the Tampa Bay Bucks, I'd be on the phone with them right now. But right now, the rest of the league, I don't really see a fit unless or until a lead back goes down. I mean, unfortunately, over these next couple of weeks, some guys will get hurt. You know, I'm sitting here in Pittsburgh. What if James Conner went down? Well, I'd call the Chargers.
Right. So you have that option sitting out there, and you're going to have it perhaps for a while. We're visiting with Matt Williamson, and I wanted to ask you about the Rams. And I want to go a little deeper than just the signing, and it's somewhat predictable. But let's go a little bit deeper and take a look at after week 11, let's say, the Chargers kind of weren't the same team, or at least Jared Goff, when he was playing against good defenses, didn't seem to be the same quarterback at times. You add in the Todd Gurley injury, and is there a possibility that the Rams may, I mean, if Gurley's down, if that's an arthritic knee or whatever it may be, could there be a reverse? Is it possible there could be a reversal of fortune for the Rams?
Could be. And what worries me more about Gurley, because I think Gurley plays and probably just doesn't have a long career. I think you manage him week to week, maybe don't give him quite the workload. But, you know, a couple years from now, he hangs it up as opposed to going a couple extra years would be my hunch with his career. But the whole key with Goff, and there's a couple quarterbacks like this, and all of them have strengths and weaknesses, is he is much, much more efficient when he's protected. And they made some changes in their offensive line. Whitworth's getting up in age. There's some new pieces there. That's what worries me the most is they're so play action dependent, longer developing plays, and he pulls the trigger well when he's protected, but when he has to improvise or get it out quicker than he wants, that's not where he's at in his career right now. And that being said, I have a lot of respect for McVay. And you basically saw Belichick figure him out in the Super Bowl. And I think they're going to go back to the drawing board a little bit. I think you're going to see more Gerald Everett, the tight end, more Darrell Henderson as a receiving back. And if you remember, McVay came from Washington, and I think they're going to be his Jordan Reed and his Chris Thompson. So I think they're going to add a new wrinkle to what they're doing. But the line situation is the thing to monitor.
Very interesting. That's why we have you on right there. I ask you the topical question and you get in and give us the real stuff. All right. That is awesome. But now let's talk about the Cowboys. And this is something that's kind of in the ether. It's kind of an abstract, but how much do you think Jerry Jones's age, turned 77 in October, is playing? I mean, you go back to Emmitt Smith, and I was talking about it briefly before you came on. Signing after the Cowboys, you know, they have to get into the season in 1993 when Jerry Jones is 50 years old, right? You know where I'm going with this. And so
Sure.
what role do you think, or if any, it's kind of hard to know, I know Jerry's talked about it a little bit, do you think could have played into this Zeke signing and this specific timing?
Maybe. I honestly hadn't looked at it through that lens, but I do think I think this is a really strong team. I mean, you look at their defense, they pretty much drafted that entire defense, and it's going to be really good. And so the offensive line is now back intact. Their stud center is back. They re-signed Leo Collins. I think they have speaking of those 90s Cowboys, they have a trio in their quarterback, running back, wide receiver now with Amari. So I think they look at it, maybe not with his age, but this is a window to win it. I mean, I think Dallas is more of a contender than people think, but they can't do it without Elliott. I mean, much like Emmett, there's not many running backs that are the straw that serve the drink, but Elliott absolutely is. And they're finally using him more as a receiver. They added a new offensive coordinator and more. I hope they expand Elliott in the passing game. He's a really good receiver at Ohio State. First 2 years, they didn't use him nearly enough. I expect a huge year from him, and I think the Cowboys are a dark horse Super Bowl type of team.
I think my mic just cut out for a second. But when you're describing that, am I out of line in saying that this is the best Cowboy team that sets up the best going into the season in the Jones-led era?
Since the Aikman days, you mean?
Right.
Yeah, I think so. I really do.
That's a long period of time.
It is, and it's a really good squad. I mean, even guys.
What do you attribute that to? Why do you think they have? Is it because Jerry maybe is kind of scaling back? Is it? Well, who knows?
But I mean, I think the results are they've drafted very well lately, and I think people are hesitant to give that front office the credit it deserves for not just Dak in the 5th round, but all those defensive guys I mentioned, the offensive linemen, even a Michael Gallup. I mean, I think he's going to be a really solid number 2 receiver. They haven't had a number 2 in a long time. I mean, there's not a lot of holes on that team, and I think Prescott's an underrated passer too.
So again, you're in Pittsburgh, and I have to ask you this question. It looks like that formerly great. And I remember, I'm an old guy, right? I remember when the Steelers and the Browns, that was a real rivalry. Maybe it is, but it was a real rivalry.
And it has
right. Like Raiders Chiefs. I'm from Kansas City. That kind of never goes away.
Sure.
But now, how do the Steelers set up this year? I mean, just what are your thoughts on the Steelers and maybe how they interface with the Browns in that division?
I mean, all you need to know about the rivalry of late is Ben Roethlisberger has more wins in Cleveland Stadium than any quarterback in history. That's amazing. You know, that not a Brown owns that record. Ben Roethlisberger owns the record for most wins in that stadium. So Steelers have utterly dominated. And I think, I don't know this, but just the vibes you get, that I think the Steelers are really embracing the underdog role. Like, we'll see what
and that's pretty rare. I mean, can you remember that happening going into the season? Has it ever happened?
No, especially with Cleveland being the favorites. I mean, sometimes maybe the Ravens were the favorite. That was the real rivalry. But I think the Steelers are kind of sitting back like, be careful what you wish for, Cleveland, because being the hunted is a lot harder in this league than people think. You know, things like all the primetime games they have to play, and you get home at 4 a.m, and then you got to prepare for the next game. Like, the Browns haven't done that. I do think they have the best roster in the division. But back to the Steelers, I expect the Steelers to be much, much better on defense, faster. Middle of the field should be a lot better. The offense has to be more balanced. It has to be less star dependent. And they threw the ball an awful lot last year, but I'm not saying they have to run the ball more, but the whole team needs to play more complementary football. I mean, the special teams were a problem. They led the league in special teams penalties. That doesn't seem like much, but it kills your opening drives. I mean, your starting field position. So I do think the team is built to be a lot more well-rounded and complement each phase a little bit better. But Ben's going to have to really play at a Pro Bowl level.
In terms of Ben Roethlisberger, because he's such a force in nature. He's almost like a human monolith in a sense, but it's like he's imperturbable. But how much gas does he have left in the tank? What's your sense?
I think quite a bit. He has been noticeably leaner the last 2 years, which means to me, I mean, he is a big human being that could be very heavy if he wanted to be, if he chose not to stay lean. So I think he's been working very hard on his conditioning, his body at this stage of his career. I think he throws the ball close to as well as he ever has. I will say I thought his accuracy last year was the worst it's been in a while. And that's something I really want to keep my eye on is he
It
missed
could
a
be
lot.
age.
It could be age. I mean, a lot of the accuracy problems when guys age is lower body, and he's had a lot of lower body injuries. I mean, so that's something I really want to watch when the Bullets are flying for real this year.
What about Drew Brees? Because he's one of those guys. A lot of people are speculating based on the second half of the season. What do you think about him?
I think you can lump a few of those guys together. I mean, Brees is the most accurate. I mean, and he was like that last year too. I mean, remarkably accurate with the football. But I think you look at Brees and Brady in particular, and to a lesser degree, I was just going to
say, yeah,
and to a lesser degree, Rivers. But these older dudes, where I think they start to show their age is late in the season. That the rigors of the year start to beat them up a little bit more. Playoffs, the last couple of years of the regular season, I think those guys start to wear down more because of age.
I think in the case of maybe both of those guys, they have this extraordinary devotion to the game. It really is kind of an outlier. I don't think you can underestimate that.
Right.
It goes a long way. Well, Andrew Luck, just look at Andrew Luck, right?
Yeah, it's a good point. And they're in very good organizations. And yes, Brady and Brees absolutely are the captain of the ship. But those teams realize, Peyton, Belichick, we need to run the ball a lot. Those backfields always produce a ton of production. It's collective, but the Patriots and Saints are very running back dependent.
We're visiting with Matt Williamson, and Matt, I'm not going to keep you much longer, but there's a couple of burning questions I got to ask you before I let you go. One of them is, you mentioned Phil Rivers, and I hesitate to say it, and this is not coming from a Chiefs fan, even though I'm a Chiefs fan. This guy's a lock to be in the Hall of Fame. Oh. But am I out of line saying he's overrated? And he's been overrated throughout his career?
I think you're out of line. I really do.
Right.
I think
the stats are there.
Yeah. I mean, I'd put him a little behind Ben. I'd put him ahead of Eli from, the guys he was drafted with. I think he's a tier below Brees and those guys, but I think he is an easy Hall of Famer.
But he's had a lot of weapons, a lot of LT, a lot of guys over the years where you would have thought they would have been able to get to the Super Bowl, win the Super Bowl. That's the basis of me saying that. And maybe that's right.
It's because he has had some talent, even Vincent Jackson and Gase, and they got a lot around him now. But where I was going to go is I think his organization doesn't do him a lot of favors. They're not, as I mentioned before, they're frugal. They've over.
Now, give me an example when you say that. Are you talking about?
Remember how they handled the Bosa situation? He sits out fighting over a little bit of something. I mean, they're not super aggressive to surround Rivers with everything he needs. And what I mean by that is his line has really been poor. I can't believe they didn't help his protection more this year. But a small little note like on the Chargers, and again, this doesn't sound like it's much, but over Phillip Rivers' career, they have almost always been the bottom of the league in special teams. They're horrible. They're always looking for kickers. They get big plays against them. Things like that.
But does that cross over when you're talking about general managers, you're talking about front office? Mm-hmm. I mean, you're going to have different guys over the years. Are you saying that has spanned, more than one GM?
Yeah, pretty much the majority of Rivers' career.
Just bad hires.
Yeah, right. They just haven't addressed that or hasn't been as much a priority for them. I can see what you're saying. I mean, I think if I'm a Rivers doubter, I would say, hey, when have you won the big one? Come put the team on your back, go to Foxborough and win one. You know what I mean? And I think there is something to be said for that. But I also think he's part of the victim of, the Patriots are just such an avalanche, such a juggernaut. Would the Chargers, the Steelers, the Broncos, the Ravens gotten another Super Bowl if it wasn't for Jordan being in your conference?
Well, yeah, right. And but it reminds me of the conversation we're having about Rivers. And again, I'm an old guy. It reminds me of the conversation that once upon a time was being talked about with John Elway and with Peyton Manning. Both of them. And maybe Phil Rivers will be in a situation that I don't know if it's going to be with the Chargers. Doesn't sound like it's going to be with the Chargers. Maybe something will happen this year, the next couple of years. I don't know though. I don't know if I see what played out with Elway and Manning. It's hard to imagine that happening with the Chargers. Maybe it will. Last thing I wanted to ask you about Trent Williams, because it seems like it's almost become kind of a mystery. He was upset at the organization. He's upset at the medical staff. Now he might play. You're trying to decipher. Is there any way to decipher what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I do think he's very unhappy with the organization. And if you were to rank organizations, this is something we've been talking about.
Yeah.
They'd be really at the bottom of the list, you know. And I like Dwayne Haskins, but he goes to Washington, and I kind of roll my eyes like, boy, he has a lot less chance to succeed now, you know, as if he went to 20 other teams. And I think Williams is kind of fed up with it.
What about Dan Snyder? Give me your first blush reaction on Dan Snyder.
I mean, I do think he's taken a step back from the days when they were signing Dion and Hainsworth and Bruce Smith and any big name that was washed up. But the same people running the organization have a free pass. You know, like I don't know
Bruce Allen.
Yeah, I don't know how he still is doing what he's doing.
Well, I really appreciate it, Matt. Hopefully you'll come back and visit. And good luck with everything. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Absolutely. Take care of yourself.
That's Matt Williamson, and you can check him out. He's all over the place on Steelers Nation Radio out of Pittsburgh. And he's on the Locked On Network, on the Locked On NFL podcast. And they do those podcasts over there every single day. Got all the teams. You should go over and check it out. In addition, former NFL scout, former major college football scout, ESPN analyst. And you could hear it. You see, I asked a couple of questions. He's over there in camp. He's living that thing. I'm asking him about Gurley, having a problematic knee, whatever it is. He takes it to the next level and absolutely destroys me completely. But that's why we have him on. And we're going to have a lot of people like that on, I'd like to think, here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And we're going to be talking here shortly to Jim Powell, the voice of the Atlanta Braves. Little change up for you here. We're going to do mostly football. We'll come back and we're going to talk about, we're going to continue to talk about Zeke. And I want to talk more about Jared Goff and the Rams. And I touched on it a little bit. You've kind of found out where I was going, or where I will be going in the show from my line of questioning to Matt. But I want to double back because this is something I've been doing on my Twitter to the last question I asked Matt Williamson. And that was, what do you think about Dan Snyder? Because I have been running a poll on my Twitter account, and I think we've got over 3,000 votes now. And I'm asking the question on the Sports by Brooks Twitter account, who is the worst owner in the NFL? And I kind of stacked the deck, if you will, in that the possible answers. I'm scrolling down. So there it is. I'm going to retweet it. I'm going to pull it up and retweet it. So if you want to go to my Twitter account, it's Sports by Brooks. So I'm going to retweet that on top. And we've got 3,210 votes so far. And so it's worst NFL owner. And the responses are Dan Snyder, other. So kind of stacking the deck. But I will say Dan Snyder has gotten 70% of that vote. Other has gotten 30%. And of course, he's the Redskins owner and has pretty much driven that franchise into the ground, but not that it was a great franchise that he inherited. And there was a big article that just came out in the Washington Post about him. And this is the kind of thing, in the DC area in the media that kind of set your watch to it. Every single year, something comes out about what a bad guy Dan Snyder is, and he's running the franchise to the ground. I mean, well, stop going to the games. I know that They no longer have that ridiculous waiting list for the Redskins. But if they really want to affect change, you would do something like that. You would just stop going to the games. But what that Twitter poll ended up being, with the Snyder other as the two responses, it turned into a free-for-all where people made suggestions in the replies about who they thought the worst NFL owner was. And so you got a million different responses from people with their worst owner. And it occurred to me, holy mackerel, there's a lot of bad owners. Guys like the Spanos, I'm just looking at it right now, the Ford family. The Ford family is, of course, the Detroit Lions. You've got the Spanos family, which is the Chargers, of course. Mike Brown with the Bengals. And, of course, when people make these suggestions, I mean, they're like, no. Our owner, he's the worst. Yeah. Mike Brown, he is definitely the worst. And, I lived in Ohio and went through that with Bengals fans, lived it. I mean, I'm from Kansas City, and I lived through the dark ages of Chiefs football with, the venerable, sainted Lamar Hunt. But I can tell you, in the 18 years I spent growing up in Kansas City, the Chiefs never had a winning record. It was a baseball town. Not anymore, but that was my experience with the Hunt family. It was not a good experience, and there was seemingly no accountability. So we get other suggestions. Of course, Art Modell, he's kind of the default evil owner, isn't he? Art Modell. And we get Jim Irsay. And, of course, his father, Robert, is the guy that backed up the moving vans and shipped the Baltimore Colts over to Indianapolis, Robert Irsay. And then we get some Cal McNairs from Houston, James Haslam, of course, from Cleveland. So you go down the list, and it makes me think, and it makes me, you go down the list, and it makes me think about, the idea that the NFL is this competitive enterprise, because God knows the whole basis of it is winning is everything, right? Well, if you have all of these legacy owners, these family businesses, and they're all collectively bargaining, right? They're big revenue sources like TV. That's all collectively bargained. Right down to the names of these teams, we call them franchises, right? It's like a McDonald's franchise. Well, McDonald's is all part of a corporation. And wait a minute, that's the NFL. But I thought everybody was trying to win. I thought it was all about competition. And it all kind of starts to make sense. You start to understand how a franchise like the Bengals can be so terrible for so long, yet people keep buying tickets, So it's always kind of mystified, me at least, how we have so many bad owners out there. And you look at somebody like the Dolphins right now, and I know Stephen Ross is one of the newer owners, but just the idea, think about this for a second. And this is what we do on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. We really, really ask the deeper question. We go down to bedrock. But ask yourself this principle of tanking, right? Tanking. Is that really a legitimate front office thing that you're going to do? Or is it more a mask, of the malpractice of that front office and that organization? Thinking about when we were talking to Matt, he was talking about the San Diego Chargers particularly, and how sloppy they were, and how Rivers never really had the kind of support personnel-wise, coaching-wise, they had just enough talent where he's had a really good career. They've had winning records, but they've never gotten over the hump. And I just keep thinking, what's the one constant there? It's the Spanhouses. It's Dean Spanos. And then you think about that absurd, ridiculous move from San Diego to Los Angeles. Let me get to this comment from Jeff J., who asks, is the Ford family really that bad or just inept? Jeff goes on, Mike Brown is so much worse because he's so cheap and apathetic, and he's not as bad as Snyder. I think it kind of goes in cycles because, as Matt Williamson also pointed out, there was a period of time where Snyder went after free agents and spent money. And there's been fits and starts with Mike Brown where he spent money here and there. I don't disagree with you, though. In the Brown family, but Mike Brown, of course, I think of all the organizations, Jeff, out there having had experience and covered the Cincinnati Bengals, myself. If ever there was a remaining mom and pop shop organization in the NFL, it would be the Cincinnati Bengals. And, you wonder how much longer is Mike Brown going to last? Certainly not rooting for his demise, but perhaps we'll see some changes sooner than later once there is a changing of the guard at the top of that organization. We're going to be joined by Jim Powell of the Atlanta Braves. He is the voice of the Atlanta Braves. And we're going to talk to him about a Braves team that I think a lot of people are sleeping on because the Dodgers are so overwhelming. But there's some chinks there. And get into that whole situation and how the Braves were able to build this organization from the ground up and also make the necessary moves that they need to now get into a contention situation. The Braves, of course, had fallen off the face of the earth as far as contention in Major League Baseball just in the last couple of years. So we'll get his perspective. He's been with that franchise, Jim Powell, for a long time. And later on, we're going to get to the bottom of these transactions. And I mean, really get to the bottom, drill down on the details when it comes to the Zeke signing, the Goff signing. We talked about some of those things with Matt Williamson, but here's a guy, Andrew Brandt, who's going to be on with us later, who still has contacts in the league. And, he was responsible for the Packers drafting Brett Favre. He was responsible in there when they changed the quarterback from Favre to Aaron Rodgers. And he's been very outspoken about that. So you're not going to get literally a better person to talk about exactly what's happened unwittingly. Who knew that we were going to have him on and all this stuff would break loose? So that's going to come up in the next hour here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And if you want to participate, you want to join into the conversation, you can participate by touching or punching or clicking on, whatever you want to call it, the fan line button, which is at the top right of your screen during the course of our show. So as we await Jim Powell joining us here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred, I want to get more into and I want to revisit the Ezekiel Elliott situation because there's a lot of different angles, and most of them that I'm going to bring up, you don't really hear talked about, drilled down on. Basic stuff, right? Basic stuff. And that would be, we talked about it So hopefully we're reconnected there, and we'll be joined by our guest Jim Powell here coming up. Sports by Brooks on Fancred. We're doing this, I might add, every single weekday, and we're doing it at 9 a.m. on the dot. Now, this is a work in progress. I got a little echo in my headphones today. That's okay. We'll work with it. It's all good. And so we're kind of feeling our way through. But I'm glad you're joining us, and I hope you come in and hang out and spread out, relax, and because this is the kind of show that I want people to say, "Oh, I mean, how many times have you're out and about, driving around or sitting around, and it's 10 o'clock in the morning, wherever you are in the country, and you realize, wait a minute, my favorite show's on. Well, hell, I'll just pull it up and get the radio show on, or get whatever that daily show is. I want you to have that. That's the goal on this show. I want people to feel like it's part of their life. And so it's going to take doing it all the time. We're going to be here, and we're going to be covering things. So everything that happens, like today, what are we doing? We're going to have some guests for you. We're going to have some analysis, like what we've been talking about with the Cowboys. We're going to talk about the Rams. And then throughout the week, we're going to get into betting. We're going to get into gambling as we start the NFL season tomorrow. So, and I just got a note from our producer, and we'll be talking baseball here in a second, and talking to the voice of the Atlanta Braves. Jim Powell is going to be joining us here in a second. Cam Smith in Boston is helping us out. I'm in Los Angeles. And now Jim is ready to go, and we're going to pull him up here in a second. So do I have to punch something up here, guys? Do I need to do that? No, there you. Hey, Jim. What's
Brooks,
going on, buddy?
how are you, man?
Sorry about that. The mic cut out a little bit. Got a little overexcited, Jim. So we got to get this sucker fixed. So Jim Powell, voice of the Atlanta Braves, joins us. And Jim, first of all, I wanted to hear from you. You're a longtime voice of that team, and you've been in Major League Baseball for decades as a broadcaster. But what's it been like with the Atlanta Braves, where seemingly there were some years there where there was no hope? A little bit like this microphone. There's no it's going to work, right? But what's it been like for you, Jim? Suddenly now you guys, not only are you contenders, but you have this pipeline of talent. So, I mean, what does that do to you as a broadcaster going to work?
Well, obviously, the better the team, the more fun we have. The better the team, the better my calls sound. We're having huge crowds at SunTrust Park. It's been, I believe, pound for pound, this is the most entertaining baseball team in Major League Baseball right now because of the blend of the youth and the veterans. It's just a joy to have a front row seat to it every day.
And I know you're a relatively young guy, but do you ever just, and I know these are a little bit, not the typical questions, but having been a Major League play-by-play guy, my longtime minor league play-by-play guy myself, and I can hear the enthusiasm in your voice, and to be, have a dynamic guy like Ronald Acuna Jr., you could argue the most dynamic player in Major League Baseball right now. But does it sometimes mystify you that the sport is so off the map, especially now that football's kicking in literally tomorrow? Whereas I think 25 years ago that wasn't a case. Is it mystifying? What are your emotions, or do you even think about it?
I don't think about baseball being off the map. Obviously, you have to share the stage when football rolls in, especially here in the Southeast, where college football in particular is king. But I always say that the Atlanta Braves, that's the one flag under which all of the fans in the Southeast of their college football teams, they can unite under one flag, and that's the Braves flag. They hate each other on Saturdays. They hate each other all week. But when they come to SunTrust Park, we're all family. And the Braves are drawing well. They're going to draw more fans to SunTrust Park this year than they did the year that they opened SunTrust Park, which is highly unusual. Usually you set the high water mark that first year, and it's really hard to ever surpass it. But the Braves are going to do that this year.
Jim Powell, the voice of the Atlanta Braves, is joining us on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And Jim, if there was one person, this might be an unfair question, who you can attribute the Braves turnaround, the state that they're in today, who would that person be, and what has their role been?
That's a good question. And yes, all of your questions are unfair, but I'll try and answer it anyway. It's hard to say because the Braves had a parade of general managers there through some controversial times. The transition from John Schuerholz to Frank Wren didn't go as smoothly as everybody had hoped. Frank was very much involved in trying to build the farm system, but they didn't have a whole lot of success in doing so. But they did leave some crumbs there for John Coppolella, who became the general manager. And then really, I mean, honestly, you probably have to finger John Coppolella as the guy who really rebuilt the farm system from top to bottom and put the Braves in this position. Now, John was found guilty of doing some
right.
underhanded things that all teams in baseball, I don't want to be an excuse maker, but I mean, he ended
made
up
an example of.
Made an example of, exactly. But he was not alone. But everything that John Coppolella did was for not the betterment of John Coppolella, but for the betterment of the Atlanta Braves in their long-term future. And then when he had to step aside, Terry McGurk, who's the chairman of the Braves, sat down with Alex Anthopoulos, and it was really like, in fact, I had a baseball executive tell me just a couple of days ago that Alex Anthopoulos inherited the best situation for any general manager going to a new team.
Keys to the Ferrari, right?
It was unbelievable. And he's the perfect guy for it too. Alex is a great guy. Everybody loves him. He's one of those guys. A lot of times in a front office, there's a wall built between the business operations side and the baseball side. And those are like two entities that are passing ships in the night. But Alex Anthopoulos, the first guy to reach out and embrace the business side. It's just been a perfect marriage for the Braves. He's the perfect guy at the perfect time for this franchise. It's good for him. It's good for us. And he came in, and here he had this great system ready to go. And he did a really good job of not doing what most general managers do when they first come in. They want to impress the fan base. They want to make a splash. They want to make some moves, and he had all this currency in prospect capital that he could throw around if he wanted to, and he hung on to it all, even down to the trading deadline this year, where he acquired 3 relievers to totally rebuild the back end of the bullpen and gave up really none of the Braves' top prospects. So the future not only it looks bright right now in the short term, but it's a long-term great outlook for the Braves.
All right. So we are back up, and we're going to bring you Jim Powell, the voice of the Atlanta Braves, here in a second. We've been talking to him about a team that's running away with the National League East, and I'm very interested to find out what their prospects are in the playoffs and what might be a problem for them in the postseason, what team. So we're going to do a little baseball here. We're going to get back to the National Football League, of course, with talk of the transactions. We've got Jared Goff. We've got Ezekiel Elliott. We've got the game tomorrow. We've got the Packers and the Bears. So you can bet now that the NFL is here, and with college football, it's going to be pretty much all football from here on out. But Jim will rejoin us. I understand he's coming back up here in a second. And we'll spend a little more time with him. Then we'll transition back over to football, and we're going to get into gambling and betting tomorrow. There you go. There he is. That's all. That's my bad, Jim. It's on me.
All good, my friend.
So I wanted to ask you, as far as the playoffs go, what are the teams do you think that potentially could give the Braves the most trouble?
Well, the Dodgers are a team that's a hurdle the Braves have not been able to clear in recent years, and they've really, especially out in LA, they've dominated the Braves to the point where I worry that it might be in the Braves' heads a little bit. Now, the Braves had a good series against the Dodgers at SunTrust Park. That certainly will help, although the Dodgers were a bit depleted at the time. The Braves are a little bit depleted as well. I mean, they're missing a couple of key regulars that they hope to get back in September, and Inciarte and Markakis. But I think the Dodgers, I mean, in an ideal world, you have the Nationals get the wild card, win the wild card game, go to LA, take out the Dodgers. And then the Braves come in behind. But it's not to say that the Braves can't beat the Dodgers, but the Dodgers just are so loaded. They're so deep that would be a tough one. I think the Braves can win a division series against the Cardinals or the Cubs, if they're paired against the National League Central. Braves are only about 4 to 5 games. I think it's 4 games in the loss column behind the Dodgers for the top seed in the National League. That would help if it gave the Braves the home field advantage. If indeed they matched up with the Dodgers, that would be very helpful.
I mean, you guys have really quietly crept up on. I'm just gone about your business all season, the last couple of seasons. But I mean, the Dodgers are the team. You look at the record; it's crazy. But there's the Braves. What the hell? They're there. They're right there. So. I want to ask you, because there's been a lot of talk about it. It's impossible to miss. And we've had some old timers lately talking about balls flying out of the ballpark to the point where it's almost a cartoon. And I just want to get your thoughts about calling those games, or, what's your reaction to what you're seeing this year and the last couple of years.
This year in particular, the word Titleist comes up a lot in
the golf ball.
Yes.
Right.
In casual baseball conversations. And you can even see it down at AAA. This is the first year they're using the Major League ball at AAA, and the ball is flying there as well. I mean, home run totals for AAA, 4A guys that have been down there forever, all of a sudden they went from hitting 13 home runs a year. Now they're hitting 25 to 30. There's no question. Nobody in baseball that I know of questions that the ball is behaving differently this year. Every record, home run wise, just about that you can think of, franchise records, league records, etc., they're all falling, and they've been falling for months. And I mean, we're just now getting September.
Take us behind the curtain, Jim. Take us behind the curtain. What are some of the conversations that are being had that you're hearing, you're participating in about this situation? Is there a concern?
Well, there is. There is a concern across the board, because first of all, from the front office standpoint, somebody is literally going to pay for these home runs. I mean, these numbers the hitters are putting up, it's going to turn into salary when you get into the off season and in future contracts. The pitchers, you say, okay, well, then you won't have to pay pitchers as much because their numbers are down. But that's not necessarily the case. Pitching is always scarce.
Look at Verlander. You still have guys that are dominant.
True. That's very true. But so from the front office standpoint, this is going to turn into a cash outlay at some point. From the baseball purist standpoint, you're seeing records fall left and right to the point where, it's almost like you're going back to the steroid era, where all of a sudden the numbers are so cheap, you can't even, you got to put them in a different category, almost put asterisks, throughout the record book. So it's a concern. I don't know that anybody is to blame per se. I don't know that it was done intentionally, but for whatever reason, the baseball is flying. The seams are a little, flatter. Pitchers are complaining the ball is just really slick, and there's no question the ball is traveling.
Because you've heard about, I'm sure you've heard all this stuff. Of course, Major League Baseball owns Rawlings. This should not be a mystery. We should know exactly what the situation is. And people have sawed those baseballs in half, and it's the pill inside the baseball. But I'm really interested. I hadn't heard about, and that's one of those eternal things, having worked in baseball, and travel with teams. Are the seams raised on the ball? Is the ball slick? And I mean, are you hearing things about that being a factor with pitchers not being able to get a proper grip on the ball? Is that something that's happening a lot?
Anecdotally, I would say the seams may be a bit of an issue. how many times do you see now in a regular game where a pitcher takes a perfectly good baseball and goes, nope, throws it to the ball boy, want another one. And it's because they don't like the feel of the ball. They don't like the seams that are
So
there.
you're seeing that happen a lot more.
I feel like yes. And again, anecdotally, I'm not chronicling it. I can't quantify it, but something's going on with the ball. Obviously, a Verlander doesn't seem bothered by it. So that's what gives me pause before I make it.
Yeah, that's what's amazing. It kind of gives you faith in humanity that the Houston Astros have what they have. And that's kind of over the years, over the decades in the history of baseball, you'll have these great pitching staffs, these dominant guys. So it's really almost counterintuitive that you would have all these great pitchers with these low opponent batting averages and these great walk to strikeout ratios. But then you have these unbelievable numbers. It's like, but to use an analogy, there's really no middle class anymore in baseball. By that, I mean, the smaller part of the game, the bunting and the subtleties. Now, do you see that? Do you see the subtleties going out of the game, or is that overrated?
No, the subtleties are pretty much, a pitcher is going to bunt, and occasionally you'll find a situation where a manager feels like they want to sacrifice. But let's take the hit and run. How many times have you seen a hit and run in Major League Baseball this year? It's gone.
Wow.
They just don't do it. It's all about, in baseball these days, they don't care about strikeouts. They care about launch angles. So you have these big uppercut swings to the point where.
Is that in youth baseball now?
In part.
Do you think that's in youth baseball? Do you think we're now getting down to the kids learning baseball that way?
I would imagine so, but I don't know that to be the case. I know that in terms of the professional baseball players, everybody is just concerned with the launch angle. You don't care if you strike out. It makes sense. If you have an uppercut swing, your bat is not on the same plane with the ball except for one instant. So you either hit it and you golf it way up in the air and it goes out because it's Titleist,
right?
Or
Titleist.
you swing it
top flight.
So
yeah,
that's where we are with baseball now. It's strikeouts, walks, home runs.
What? How do you feel personally about that? You just not speaking for the Braves, not speaking for baseball, but what's that experience like for you? Does it almost feel like? Well, maybe it's not this way, but I would kind of feel like I don't even feel like I'm in the same place. But that's kind of my thought process, having done hundreds and hundreds of baseball games as a play-by-play announcer. Does that ever creep into your psyche?
Well, Brooks, get off my lawn, because that's what you sound like if you complain about it. But no, it's not the same game as it was.
Right. It's like you're losing an old friend.
The Braves play almost nothing but 3.5-hour games, even if it's a low scoring game. The pitching changes. The game is different, and I don't think it's as pretty a game as it was before. I like the speed.
I think losing the speed is probably the worst part. Not having that element in the game, the dynamic nature of speed in the game. Everything is about hitting the ball 600 feet.
Well, speed in the outfield and on the infield it's still helpful on the defensive side. And the Braves actually are a pretty good example of that. Braves have a lot of speed, especially when NCRT is available. But now Billy Hamilton's filling in. Acuna can run. Acuna's got a chance to be a 40-40 guy. So speed is not completely gone from the game, but it's just the game is just played differently. The priorities are different. They don't really care. That's why the shifts are working, is because instead of somebody just, okay, I'm going to foil the shift, I'm just going to hit a ground ball to the other side and get a free base hit every time. It's worth it. I've heard players talk about it, that it's still worth it to just try to pull the ball and yank it out of the ballpark. Better that than a single, because to score a run with a single, you need 3 of them. But to score a run with one big fly, you need 1 swing. So that's the way hitters are valuing. And maybe this will all cycle back. I like to think that it will at some point. But at this point, that's where we are in 2019 baseball.
Visiting with Jim Powell, the voice of the Braves, on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And I wanted to be sure and mention the New York Mets, because they are beloved on Twitter. and beloved online, and it's all because of the Schadenfreude, whatever you pronounce that. And the Atlanta Braves have contributed to the New York Mets Schadenfreude over the years. And I was wondering, and of course you've been a witness to that, what is it about the Braves that the Mets can never see? They never seem to be able to get over the Braves. Well, you guys seem to have their number.
I don't know that there's a single factor. I think maybe you have to look at individuals. During the Chipper Jones era, Chipper Jones owned the New York Mets. I mean, ownage. Go back and look at his numbers against the New York Mets in his career. He's got a son named Shea.
Oh, you got to be kidding me. That's
how he feels about the New York
wow.
Mets. And at the end of his career, he handed the baton apparently to Freddie Freeman. Freddie Freeman now owns the New York Mets. And as your best player goes, so goes your team. And that's the way it's gone for the Braves. They've got a couple of dynamic players, a couple of the best players in the history of the Atlanta Braves, who just had the number of the New York Mets. And I can only imagine how the Mets and their fans feel about that.
I wanted to ask you, particularly, you mentioned Ronald Acuna Jr. And as someone who is around the guy, we have this unfortunate language barrier with him, which I think Major League Baseball really is dropping the ball on. I mean, Major League Baseball, and I think the league office, really, it's their responsibility because the clubs aren't going to do it voluntarily. But we've got to find a way to bridge the language barrier between these Latino players and I think the public. And this is an eternal thing. Maybe retiring Roberto Clemente's number is something to get the ball rolling. But just before we get into what kind of guy he is, what kind of person be around and a player, do you have any thoughts on that? The fact that we don't connect with the Latino players?
Well, you know, the Braves have done a pretty good – actually, Major League Baseball now has assigned a bilingual interpreter to all the teams. So every team has the ability
How long have they had that?
2 to 3 years. So it's been around for a bit. The Braves actually have a tremendous translator, a guy named Franco Garcia, who you wouldn't know him and no one in another market would know him. But Braves country loves Franco Garcia. He's like a rock star.
Oh, that's awesome.
He's got long hair and he's a boyish guy and he's really, really nice guy. And he speaks perfect Spanish and perfect English. And it's just amazing.
Well, they know him because he's always standing next to the star of the game. Is that what you mean?
Right.
So
yes,
people see him all the time. Who's that guy?
Right. Exactly.
Right.
And then they're amazed when they hear him, you know, taking a question that's given in English and putting it into perfect Spanish to, in this case, Ronald Acuna. And then Ronald Acuna comes back with very fast, you know, fluent Spanish. And Franco listens to all that. And then he speaks perfect English, better than you and me, back into the camera and to the microphone. So Braves country just is amazed at the talent. I mean, it's easy for Franco. He doesn't think anything of it. But for the rest of us, we're just amazed. So, I mean, we still hear from Ronald Acuna after almost every game. Franco is right there with him after most games, and along with our other Spanish-speaking players that don't feel quite comfortable enough to speak in English. I think those guys are all working toward becoming more fluent in English, and hopefully a lot of folks on the other side are working to try and meet them halfway on the Spanish language barrier.
Well, last thing real quick. What's Ronald Acuna Jr. like just to watch him every day? What's his ceiling, you think?
Well, I think it's up to Ronald, really. It's, the Braves signed him basically to a 10-year contract. So he's going to be with the Braves the first 10 years of his career, and he's going to undoubtedly do a lot of tremendous things. He's already doing a lot of tremendous things. There's a bit of a double-edged sword with a 10-year contract, that you're a young guy and now all of a sudden you've got a significant amount of money. And so that's when you find out what he has in him. How good does he want to be? Does he just want to be comfortable with the money? I'm sure he comes from a relatively impoverished background. Is the money enough? And then you put your feet up and relax. That certainly has happened many times in all professional sports. Or does he have a desire to be the best? Because if he does have that desire, if he has, and I'll use Mike Trout as an example. I mean, Mike Trout's got plenty of money too, and you don't see him ever taking a second off in a baseball game. So we're going to find out from Ronald Acuna, does he want to be the best player in the game? because if he wants to be and he works at being the best player in the game, he will be.
Well, Jim, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. Hopefully we can revisit this and talk to you again when you guys are in the World Series, and look forward to your call in the World Series when you get there, because I have no doubt the way the Braves are going, you're going to get there eventually.
Well, Brooks, it's an absolute honor to be on your show. Congratulations on the new show. And I'll be watching and listening. Call me anytime.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Jim. That's Jim Powell, voice of the Atlanta Braves. Great guy. And has been doing the Brave games for a long time. And he actually did the Milwaukee Brewers games with Bob Uecker, did the Minnesota Twins games, and great talent. And it's great to see, friends of yours, and Jim is a friend of mine, the fact that he's calling games with a winning team. Because when you do 162 games, it's a lot more than that when you count spring training, all the travel that goes into it. It can get really tough if the team isn't very good. It's a lot worse jobs, I know. But so this is Sports by Brooks on Fancred. We're going to be doing this every weekday, beginning at 9 a.m. Pacific. And we'll be here for roughly 90 minutes to 2 hours. And today we're talking some baseball. You just heard a breakdown of the Braves, a breakdown of the National League. We're going to spend probably a lot more time on football. And coming up, we're going to talk to Andrew Brandt. Andrew Brandt, the Oracle, if you will, if we're fortunate enough to get him today. So I wanted to revisit and go back to eventually the situation with the Dallas Cowboys, because we mentioned the age of Jerry Jones. I'm not going to belabor that. I know I've already hammered that into the ground. But what's also fascinating to me, really interesting, is the dynamic between the quarterback, Dak Prescott, Zeke, and the wide receiver, Amari Cooper. Now, you remember the Cowboys last year when they started the season off, and they didn't start the season off well, and that prompted that trade for Amari Cooper with the Raiders, with the Cowboys sending a first-round pick to the Raiders for Cooper. And then, of course, we know the rest. Cowboys took off and had a great year. So they had a great year when they had those three guys, right? And when you don't have Ezekiel Elliott, or you don't have a Cooper, or you don't have a Dak, it ain't going to happen. You got to have all three guys. We learned that. But the guy who really makes it go is Ezekiel Elliott. Now, think about this. Dak Prescott, he's waiting to get paid. He's waiting to make $30 million, $34 million. That's probably going to happen. But what is required? What's required for Dak to make that money? Remember when it was just Dak and Zeke, it wasn't all that great. He might not make that $30 million eventually. In comes Cooper, and now that possibility suddenly is back, and it's presenting itself, right? I think it's safe to say that if Zeke's not on the field, I'm saying Zeke because I can't pronounce Ezekiel. I got it that time. But when Zeke's not on the field, well, Zach's not going to make that $30 million. So you absolutely have to have all three of those guys, and it's going to be an art and it's going to be a science for this team, the Cowboys, to have the ability to keep all of those guys in tow, somehow keep everybody happy. You remember Cooper was holding out early in training camp with the Cowboys, but then, he submitted to the betterment of the team, if you will, and Dak hasn't said anything either. Well, they're not saying anything because they're not going to get paid if Zeke doesn't come back. Now, here's the greatest irony of all. the greatest irony is that Dak, even though he's going to be making double eventually, probably, or maybe over double what Zeke just got, his contract, which was essentially an extension worth $50 million, guaranteed dollars over 4 years. Dak's not going to make double what Zeke is making unless Zeke is on the field. It's a strange situation, but it explains why Dak Prescott is in that situation and doing what he's doing. You know, what's interesting about Dak Prescott, I think there's a perception that Jared Goff, who just got the $110 million, that Jared Goff is a much, much better quarterback. That Dak Prescott, well, I know some people might say or think that Goff is a system quarterback with the Rams under McVay, and that you know, I think that's certainly in the realm of possibility, considering the year before McVay got there, Goff went 0-7 under Jeff Fisher. But when you look at this microphone, we got to replace this microphone, I think. But when you look at Dak Prescott, right, and you look at his statistics, they're remarkably similar to Jared Goff. So when you think about Dak Prescott, there's a lot of people who would say he's not $110 million quarterback like Goff is. But when you look at the statistics, they're not that much different. And when you look at the teams, you know, obviously Rams beat the Cowboys in the playoffs. But that was, in the case of the Rams, that was driven by C.J. Anderson and to an extent Gurley. It wasn't driven by Goff. Goff wasn't the guy that won that game. That was a running victory for the Rams over the Cowboys. So the whole point of this discussion is what's going to happen to Dak and what's going to happen to Cooper. And if you're Jerry Jones and you turn 77 next year, right, and you know that's coming, age is creeping up, and you see the situation where you have to have all these guys, but you realize you might not be able to keep Amari Cooper. It's got to be an ominous thing, I would imagine, for Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys. And as Matt Williamson said earlier, the former NFL scout, ESPN analyst for 10 years now, the podcaster and the radio guy doing Steelers radio. As Matt Williamson said, I mean, they've got to have all three guys there if they're going to win. And that might be an impossibility if they're going to pay Dak $34 million. Is there going to be any money left for Amari Cooper? And if there isn't, what happens to the Cowboys? I mean, we saw what happened before Cooper got there. This is Sports by Brooks on Fancred. If you want to join the conversation, go ahead and hit that fan line button in the top right corner. You can also comment on the show. We're going to be here every day, Monday through Friday, as we do this show weekdays, brand new show. And this is day 2 so far. And I also wanted to go back and I wanted to talk about the Goff signing, as we haven't really addressed it so far. That's the big news this morning I was getting ready for with this show, because yesterday afternoon, we get the news that the biggest guarantee in the history of the NFL, the largest guaranteed sum in the history of NFL football player contracts, was awarded to Jared Goff yesterday afternoon by the Rams. So that was $110 million. And we haven't really talked about that yet. I briefly mentioned it when I was discussing the Rams with Matt Williamson earlier today. But they, when you look at the Rams, and I don't hear people saying this, but it's an elephant in the room. Obviously, Todd Gurley is the linchpin of that team. When you look at the Super Bowl, and Gurley's not a factor, you saw how easily Goff was neutralized by the New England Patriots. But more specifically, more importantly, let's go back into the Rams season last year, and let's take a look at around game 11, game 10. And that was a point where Jared Goff became a different quarterback. The first 10 games of the year, actually the first 11 games, because the Kansas City Chiefs game, that was that big shootout at the Coliseum. They had to move from Mexico City. So Goff played well in that game offensively because the Chiefs are a joke. They can't stop anybody. Following that game, if you track Jared Goff's performances and you look at the teams he was playing, he didn't play a good game against a good defense the rest of the season. He played well against the 49ers at the end of the year. He played well against the Cardinals at the end of the year. And that's how he really padded his stats. But obviously they were terrible against the Chicago Bears, but there were other teams that had quality defenses that after week 11, after the Chiefs game, the Rams were a different team. And it wasn't just because Gurley had gotten hurt, because he didn't get hurt until very late in the season. I think it was like week 14 or something that Todd Gurley got hurt. So think about, we're going into the season with the Rams now. And, well, Jared Goff gets this huge contract, $110 million. And they've got their full complement of receivers now. Cooper Kupp is back. And I think if you looked at it superficially, what I was just talking about, Cooper Kupp, wide receiver, the security blanket for Jared Goff, right? Think of a guy like Julian Edelman with Tom Brady. Brady always seems to have those slot receivers who are always in the right place at the right time as a security blanket. Well, that's Cooper Kupp for Jared Goff. Well, he went out. Remember, I was talking about week 10, week 11, and then all of a sudden Goff's performance as a passer went down. Well, that's right when Cooper Kupp went out, and he's back. And so you now have the best trio of receivers in the league for the Rams. And you might say, well, things are great. The problem with that is, and this is something that amazingly people don't bring up when you hear these discussions about the Rams going into the season, it's like in a vacuum where we don't acknowledge, well, Todd Gurley's career is probably over, right? Because to me, it says a lot about a player's injury if he's had that injury. And how often does this happen? Basically never. But what does it say? Especially a player like Gurley, such a high-profile player, makes a ton of money, and we don't know what's wrong with him. Remember the Super Bowl? Well, we're not sure. And it's like we're relying on TMZ. And you may remember Gurley. Wow, Gurley went to the club and he was kind of limping. I mean, that's what we're going on as far as his injury is concerned. And has it changed? Hasn't changed. CJ Anderson, who helped bail the Rams out last year, helped them win that playoff game against the Cowboys, no longer there, right? So all the things that I just laid out to you, and I laid them out a little bit to Matt, because I was trying to kind of get him to come along with me. I was baiting the hook. Yeah. Agree with me. The Rams are going to be a dumpster fire. They're going to be terrible. He wouldn't go along with me. But what he did do, and that's the reason why he's on the show, is he pointed out that the Rams have other problems. They have problems on the offensive line. They're going to have problems with protection. And his point was Jared Goff can absolutely not quarterback without having consistent protection. So now I look at the Seahawks. I look at Russell Wilson, who is obviously a dynamic player, a great player, and they just they basically picked up Jadeveon Clowney for a can of Pringles. Sorry, I've got like kind of an echo in my headphones, but we're going to get through it today. And so they're able to pick up Clowney for basically nothing, the Seahawks. All right. And they already made the playoffs last year and had the dummies coaching the Seahawks used Russell Wilson in that game against the Cowboys. Well, who knows what would have happened? It is remarkable, especially when you think about the history of the Seahawks with Pete Carroll, the recent history, the Super Bowl history, right? How is it that we're sleeping on the Seahawks? And I'm here to tell you, and I want you to remember this. Remember where you got this. The Seahawks are going to win that division. And Russell Wilson's going to have another great year. Now, he shouldn't have to sneak up on anybody. But guess what? That's what's happening. Somehow, some way. I don't know what it is about the Rams. I guess when you give a guy $110 million, it's natural to assume they're going to have a great team. But I think there's a lot of people out there. I talked to a couple today as I was discussing the Rams with a couple of friends who I think we all have this response. When we think back to the Super Bowl and how seemingly mystified Jared Goff was. Jared Goff, you remember in the Super Bowl. Yeah, Bill Belichick. I really have to kind of suspend disbelief to believe that Bill Belichick came up with a gadget defense, right, that caused Jared Goff to look like he was back playing in his first year when he went 0-7 under Jeff Fisher, right? Or in his first year at Cal. That's what he looked like, if not worse. This was a Super Bowl. What was it? Was there not a disconnect there? It's like, how can this be happening? How can this be happening? Is Bill Belichick that great a coach? That's something I want to talk about. Maybe we'll do that tomorrow. That's a great subject because when you're evaluating the Patriots in the context of what I just talked about, the mastery of Bill Belichick, and I'm not denying that there is some. I think it's overdone, though. It's overblown. You look at the AFC East, it's a disaster every year. How would your team, your favorite team in the NFL fare? How would they fare if they were in the same division as the Bills every year, the same division as the Dolphins, as the Jets, right? All these sad sack franchises. It's remarkable. And if you don't think that has something to do with the genius of Bill Belichick, along with the quarterback, Tom Brady, you're kidding yourself, right? If I was going to place importance on, who is most responsible for the Patriots dynasty. And I don't think you could have that dynasty without both of them. I would actually place much more importance on Tom Brady. All you have to do is look at what Belichick did at Cleveland, look at what he did at New England before Brady got there. I think the other big part of it, the big dynamic and element that keeps it all together, fuses those somewhat dissonant personalities together and keeps it going, keeps the ship afloat, if you will, is Robert Kraft. You can't discount him in that situation. So we're going to wrap it up today on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. But coming up tomorrow, we're going to have some great guests, including Matt Peralt of SB Nation Radio. He'll join us from Las Vegas. He's the host of Pushing the Odds, and he's going to join us from a sports book in Vegas. And nobody knows more about gambling on football. He talks about it all day, every day. So I'm really excited to get him on, and he's really excited to come on. I chatted with him yesterday, and that'll be a good visual. And then we're going to have Ian Rappaport, needs no introduction. We're going to have Ross Dellinger. Now, if you know anything about college football media, Ross Dellinger is the man. Louisiana guy, right? But he is a guy who knows where all, and in college football, there's a lot of buried bodies, but he knows better than anyone else, where all those bodies are buried. That's Ross Dellinger. And we want to get his take on LSU and Texas in particular. That's his sweet spot, along with Texas A&M and Clemson. LSU, Texas may be the best non-conference matchup in college football this season. LSU and Texas. And Ross just wrote a big article about how LSU almost hired Tom Herman, the current coach at Texas. And he takes you behind the scenes as to how Eddie O, Coach Ed Orgeron, was able to get that LSU job. So we'll talk to him about that. And we're also going to talk to someone in Los Angeles who I've known a long time. I've known him since he was the Daily Trojan newspaper, the USC newspaper. Arash Markazi, who is a prominent now columnist for the Los Angeles Times. Nobody knows more on a day-to-day basis about Los Angeles sports than Arash. He's going to be one of our LA guys, if not the LA guy we're going to lean on. Hopefully we'll get him in the studio. I'm going to go have lunch with him, I hope, later this week. But we're going to lean on him for some analysis about the Rams, some inside stuff, along with the Chargers. Find out what's going on. Got some good stuff from Matt Williamson earlier today. Great chat with Jim Powell, the voice of the Atlanta Braves. I promise you tomorrow we'll have the little echo. You can't hear it, but we'll get that out of there. And I really appreciate my producer, Cam Smith, for piloting the ship. Everybody at Fancred, all of you have watched and listened. And tell somebody you know to download that Fancred app. Remember, we're going to be here 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern time, every single day. Get it on your phone. You have all those crappy apps. Get rid of them. All right? Get the Fancred app. Go into the app. Check out the amazing communities, all the functionality, the photos, the videos, the shows, the archives. It's freaking awesome. You get lost in that thing. So we'll be back tomorrow. I appreciate you joining us. I'm Brroks Melchior, and this has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.